Hi, I'm Tony Russo, and this is In Case You Missed It from Kates-Boylston for the week ending Friday, January 10th, 2025. This episode is sponsored by Passages International. Looking for a way to honor your loved one while honoring the planet? At Passages, they specialize in eco-friendly funeral products made from renewable, biodegradable materials. Whether it's a stunning willow casket, a biodegradable urn for scattering, or their unique memorial keepsakes, Passages helps create meaningful goodbyes that tread lightly on the earth. Join the movement toward greener funerals. Visit passagesinternational.com and discover how you can celebrate life while protecting the planet for generations to come. Link in the show notes. First up, some big news from Matthews International, which announced that it would be selling SGK brand solutions for $250 million plus another $100 million in stock. So under the new deal, which will take probably about 6 months to go through and to be approved, Matthews would sell SGK to a company called SGS and Company, which is in a similar business. That company would make a new company, and it will be a combination of SGK and SGS. Matthews will retain 40% interest in that, as well as get $50 million in preferred stock to make up the rest of the $350 million sale price. If you're a subscriber to Funeral Service Insider, then you also got an email, or are about to get an email, with a breakdown of the kind of, not behind the scenes, but the implications and some context for the story. I think what's important is that things are moving at Matthews. And what's interesting is that this comes with just about a month and change before they have their big proxy fight. Barrington Capital has asked to put up 3 more board members, which would give it control of the Matthews board. And if they gain control of the Matthews board, they want to remove Joseph Bartolesi, who is the CEO of Matthews currently. They feel that Bartolesi, along with some of the other board, have been too slow to do things that will improve shareholder value. I was looking around this morning. In 2014, I think Matthews was trading for like close to $75 or something like that. But in recent years, it has been trading around $48 and change. Today, it's around $30, and that's after a big rally following this announcement. So it'll be interesting to see what Matthews can do in the next month to stave off this proxy fight, or it will be interesting to see whether new management makes more cuts. One of the interesting parts of the deal is Matthews is keeping one of its manufacturing arms that was part of SGK. And that was a peculiar decision, and I can't find anybody who can tell me why, although I did find somebody who is willing to speculate on the record in the story, which you can find in Funeral Service Insider. But if you wanted just a link to the press release from Matthews, you can find that in the show notes. I've mentioned before that Funeral Service Insider, the section of Kates-Boylston.com, has lots of free content as well as, the behind the paywall stuff. Among them is a section called Mergers and Acquisitions, where we put as many of the mergers and acquisitions that we find, that come to our attention. If you have a merger or an acquisition and you would like to tell us about it, please send me your press release, put me on your distribution list. I'd be happy to run it. Same thing if you have someone who gets a promotion. Anything that you want other people to know, send it to me and I will make sure I tell as many people as possible. But this week there are 2 particular ones that I want to talk about because I think it points to a bigger picture idea that we'll be discussing more as the year goes on. In SCI's case, they acquired 3 funeral homes under the banner J. Warren Funeral Services in Casa Grande, Arizona. And this is something that I've spoken with several people about already this year. I know that, SCI was very open about the fact that they were going to be buying funeral homes all year as much as made sense for them. And some of the other consolidators I've spoken to, both large and small, say that their interest is more in groups than in regular funeral homes. Not to say that single funeral homes are off the table, but there is some attraction to funeral homes that are already kind of grouped together. So buying these 3, they already have others in the area that it kind of makes a larger group out of a smaller group. Especially, when SCI buys it, yes, it makes a much larger group out of a much smaller group. But what was interesting was the other one that I wanted to mention, which is Frary, F-R-A-R-Y. They just picked up their 6th funeral home in the New York area, in the Governor, New York area. And what was interesting about that is there were 2 funeral homes in Governor, New York. One was a Frary owned, and the other one was called Green Funeral Home. Now, back in 2021, one of the funeral directors from Green Funeral Home left and went to work for Frary, and now that funeral director is coming back to run Green Funeral Home under the Frary brand. And we talk about the third key employee a lot when we're talking about succession. And to tie this to the SCI move, the people who had owned the funeral home that sold to SCI said they had more promotable employees than they could promote. And they said that by joining up with SCI, it would give their employees more upward mobility, which is a really interesting take that I don't know, I haven't considered before for sure. I don't think I've written about that, but be sure that I'll be writing about things like that in the future, because it's the same thing here with the Frary funeral home. They had a key employee and they found that key employee a funeral home to buy for. He doesn't own the funeral home, but now he has more responsibility, and there is upward mobility now. There's more upward mobility in the company because they expanded and purchased another funeral home. So it's something to consider, especially if you're a small funeral home looking to grow, or if you're looking, if you're making a succession plan and you are worried not only about what happens to your name, but what opportunities your employees will have when you pass the business on. It might be worth considering to sell it to a large independent group in your area for that reason, because you may be able to help your employees as well as make sure that your legacy is protected. Links to both of those stories in the show notes. In, I guess, more acquisition news, the casket company Thacker has picked up another casket company called Southern Legacy Casket of Bowling Green, Kentucky. One of the interesting things about that is not only did they buy this company, but they also expanded it. In Bowling Green, they picked up additional warehouse space to better serve that kind of region. Now, Thacker is in this area on the East Coast. It's not far from where I'm recording this today. It's in Monrovia, Maryland. And so going up gives them more reach in the Northeast as well as into the West. And it's an exciting move for them. And I've reached out to Southern Legacy Casket to find out a little bit about that company. And we'll see if I can get you out a feature on them before too long. But for now, link in the show notes to the deal. something I just kind of want to give you a heads up about more than actually do reporting on, because it is happening literally while I am recording this video. There is Project Heart Island. The Heart Island Project is a collective that's working to make things better and more equitable on New York's mass grave island. We've reported about Heart Island several times, both here in FSI and in the FSI, the newsletter, and as well as in American Cemetery and Cremation, because it is a really kind of particular place. And this week there was an exhumation on Hearts Island, as someone who had been murdered and, unclaimed and so interred at Heart Island. They identified the woman who was murdered, and they were able to get in contact with her family, and they went and they got the body. They are making a presentation on, they made a presentation on January 9th at 7 p.m., the Heart Island Project, with a plan to have individual burials or to completely do away with the need for using mass graves on Heart Island. And it's a tantalizing notion. I think it could be, if New York can solve its, indigent burial problem, then there's hope for the rest of the small towns in the country. So it's a story I'm going to be following, but I want to invite you, and there will be a link in the show notes to the presentation. I do not know when they'll post the video of the presentation, if they'll post it at all, but either way, I'm going to be following up on this story in the coming weeks, and it may be followed up on as well in American Cemetery and Cremation. So stay tuned for that, but there's a link to a couple of those great stories about Heart Island in the show notes. There's another report about a funeral home in Ohio, and it being the first, and I just want to qualify that I'm rehashing someone else's reporting. I've not done this reporting myself, because last time I said something was the first, I hedged, and I was correct to hedge. So I'm going to hedge again. But according to The Blade, Brown Legacy Memorial is Toledo's first Black-owned funeral home to open in decades. The C. Brown Funeral Home had recently closed, but Richard Brown III, second-generation funeral director, has opened this Brown Legacy Memorial to serve the community. He was looking to open his own funeral home, but he didn't have the resources and the demand yet to have his own building. So he's actually working out of a colleague's funeral home, the Callisto Funeral Home in Toledo. And a couple weeks ago, I ran a story on Angela Woosley, who is doing the same thing. We're going to see more and more of this. When I first started back in 2022, one of the early stories I did was about a gentleman who was working to put together a collective of funeral home owners who worked out of the same office and did funeral homes out of the same building. It's something that happens more often and is happening more often. So we're going to report on that as it happens. If you are a funeral home owner who doesn't have a funeral home, whose funeral home is in someone else's funeral home, I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to know how common this is. It seems like it's more common than I thought. And hopefully it becomes more common, because I think that is a great way to be able to serve more families and for people to feel like they are more independent and still be able to earn a living as funeral directors. So a link to that in the show notes. But again, please reach out to me. I'll give you the phone number at the end so you can leave a voicemail if you'd like. I've said before, and I'll continue to say, that I'm not really in the name and shame business. I don't think that's what we should do as journalists. However, sometimes the name of the accused is important for the larger story. And that, I think, is the case with this story out of Salt Lake City, Utah. The State Funeral Service Board recently revoked the license of Lonnie Nyman, who they had restored the license back in November. But Lyman wasn't 100% forthright in the restoration hearing, and when the state's attorney general found out that he had his license back, he reached out to the funeral board and told them that, you know, they had been misinformed by Mr. Nyman. So he was released from prison in March after being sentenced in 2019 on multiple charges, including defrauding clients, sending an explicit image of himself to a minor, deleting evidence. There's a list. The link is in the show notes. But what I want to hit on, and I would love feedback on this because I think I might say something that's vaguely controversial. I hope it's not. But if you are on a funeral board and a person has been convicted of defrauding their clients, I don't think it matters if they've served their time. That is bad for the industry. And I don't think that if you are a funeral service board, that if you're on the board, that if you're in the upper echelons of funeral service and you have the opportunity to, quote, forgive, unquote, someone for having stolen from their families, that I don't think that's forgivable. I think they have to get into another business. And the reason is, you know, I think that we'll all recall the New York, the Wall Street Journal, I believe it was the Wall Street Journal, a couple of years ago said there's a problem with the NFDA and the NFDA is policing itself and they're not doing a good job. And everyone was up in arms, and rightfully so. I think that the NFDA's policing process for the funeral rule and for different potentially accidental cases is valuable and useful, and making corrections is something that we should all do. I mean, I assure you, I will make a correction about something that I've done in the next 2 or 3 weeks. I never go very long without saying something that I have to either walk back or take back or better clarify. Those are things that happen to all of us in all of our professions. But stealing from a grieving family isn't forgivable. And when the industry makes that forgiveness, it undermines everyone else. And I'm happy to see that the board found out that he had been less than honest with them, according to the Attorney General, about what he was convicted of and what he wasn't convicted of. And again, you can read the details of it in the show notes. I don't want to harp on what he did, but I do want to start a conversation about things that, you know, if there's an honest mistake, you mistakenly cremate the wrong person, it's tragic, but it happens. If you switch a body, it is tragic, but it happens. If you perform sloppily, it's tragic, but it happens. But fraud isn't an accident. If you tell someone that you're going to put their money aside and then you go out and buy yourself something with their money and plan on just not charging them when they come for their funeral, that's why people are afraid to open preneed accounts. And until they can trust that, you know, that funeral service is going to come down on these people, it's an understandable fear. And we as an industry promote that fear when we don't have a zero tolerance policy for stealing from grieving families, as if that needs to be said out loud. What am I missing? Tell me. I would love to know if I've gone overboard here, if there's something I don't understand. Please take a look at the story and I'd be happy to be corrected. But if you're on a funeral board and someone is trying to get their license back after having defrauded someone, take another second. Take another second and ask yourself what's more valuable to the industry. One additional funeral director who appears contrite, or coming down really hard on people who steal from grieving families. I don't know what I'm missing here. I must be missing something, because the Utah Funeral Board even considered restoring this, to actually restore this person's license, until they found out he was dishonest. And also, due diligence. If someone comes to you and says, yeah, the police said that they were mistaken and I'm good now and they didn't mean to charge me with all of those things, make a phone call. I don't know. But again, link in the show notes. And that will do it for this week. Funeral Service Insider, in case you missed it, is a Kates-Boylston production. It was written, edited, and videoed by me, Tony Russo. Please subscribe wherever you're listening now, or follow if you're on Apple. If you're listening to this on your computer, please take out your phone, go to the podcasting app that is almost certainly already on there. If you have Spotify, that counts. It's a app for listening to podcasts as well as a music app. Type in Funeral Service Insider. We'll come up. We're the only one with that name. Same thing if you have an iPhone, just type that purple circle, tap that purple circle rather, that has the Apple Podcast insignia on it. Type in Funeral Service Insider and click the little plus button to follow us. When it says subscribe, it doesn't mean that that's a paid subscription. Subscribing to this podcast is free. We're also on YouTube. You can hit the little bing bing button on YouTube. And again, when my video comes out on Friday morning, you will be among the first to know, and you can watch it, and then you can get back to me. You can tell me what's wrong. You can tell me what's right. You can tell me what you'd like to see covered, whatever you'd like. You can reach me through the show notes. There is a link to email me, or you can call and leave a voicemail at 732-746-0233, extension 709. And that will take us into the weekend. I hope you have a great weekend. I'm here on the East Coast. It snowed last week, and I live in rural America, so we don't plow, and no one has left my house in a week. Everyone here is kind of bouncing off the walls a little bit, and we have some more snow in the forecast for the weekend here in my part of Maryland. So providing I survive the weekend and no one gets cabin fever and goes all the shining on me, I will check in with you guys next week.